Welcome again, grade 8, to another video presentation as we continue our revision exercise. In this presentation, we want to expand our knowledge base on weather and climate. Remember, in our previous presentation, we had looked at weather and climate, we had defined what both are, and spent a little time exploring those two concepts. In this presentation, as we continue our revision, we want to expand on that a little bit and bring into play the whole idea of climate change and global warming, etc., and the role that weather and climate plays in all of that. As a reminder, I want you to focus your attention on the information that's before you. This information you got as notes that you were to have written off in your notebooks. If you did not do so, well, I guess from this presentation, you may be able to get some information that you could put in your notebooks. All right, but the whole intent and purpose of this was to revise the concepts so that we can better be prepared for the examination. So let's begin. Weather refers to the short-term atmospheric conditions. So remember, we had established that the key is short-term. So weather, every time you think of weather, you must think of short-term. So it's the short-term atmospheric conditions. The atmospheric conditions that we are referring to here, in our previous presentation, we had identified them as weather elements. They fall under the family name of precipitation. It's the same thing we are talking about here. All right. So weather refers to the short-term atmospheric conditions, and climate refers to the weather pattern over a specific region, averaged over a long period of time. So there's the key term again, long period of time. So remember, weather, short period of time. Climate, long period of time. Now the climate of the Caribbean is tropical marine. I explained that to you in the previous presentation. I'm sorry, that it is tropical. The climate of the Caribbean is constantly tropical marine. It is tropical because it falls within the tropical zone, and it is marine because of the influence that the Caribbean Sea and the wind of the Caribbean Sea, the breeze from the Caribbean Sea, has on the temperature, the weather on each island of the Caribbean. Remember that the Caribbean, by and large, is made up of islands, and islands are land masses that are completely surrounded by water. Are we together? So the climate in the Caribbean is tropical marine. It's primarily influenced by the ocean, with an average coastal temperature of around 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 degrees Celsius, and therefore all the year round it is generally warm to hot. And we had explored that in the last presentation. With one of or two distinct wet seasons per year. Temperatures are generally coolest in January and warmest in August. All right. Now that we have an idea as to what weather is and what climate is, we want to look at some of the factors now that influence climate. All right. Now we are focusing on climate. Remember, climate is a long-term weather patterns. So we want to focus a little bit on climate because it is the long-term weather patterns that we observe, we record, or we observe that will determine what the conditions are like, generally speaking, around us. And that helps us to determine whether we are experiencing global warming, whether there's a change in the climatic conditions, those that have any contribution with the adverse weather systems that we are now having. Okay, so one of the factors that influence climate is latitude. The latitude refers to how far north or how far south from the equator a place is. All right, so latitude is a major factor affecting weather and climate on our planet. Now the sun's rays plays an integral part in this process. So because we are located in the tropical, you can read the rest of it in your on latitude here. But generally speaking, the because we live in the tropical zone, and the tropical zone falls between the Tropic of Capricorn, which is to the south, and the Tropic of Cancer, which is to the north. That's both south and north of the equator. So that region is generally warm to hot, depending on where exactly you are. The closer you are to the equator, the hotter it is. The further you are away from the equator, the cooler it is. But once you're within the tropical zone, all right, it is generally warm to hot. All right. Now the sun's rays within the tropical zone generally remains constant. So you get the same thing all year round, right? So based on the notes, it says that because of this, now the sun's rays shine mostly directly on places between the Tropic of Capricorn and Tropic of Cancer, and because of this, these areas are warm all year round, right? So in the previous presentation, I shared with you that the best soil for cultivation, for agriculture, can be found there. The greenest plant can be found there. Vegetation can be found here. Um, the minerals and the resources that are needed, it's generally found in this area, right? And it's because of where it is located on the planet. Now, as we move further away from the tropics, the sun's rays hit the surface at a more oblique angle. So it's about a slightly slant angle. So whereas in the tropics, if you see my hand, whereas in the tropics, the sun rays come directly down, right? When you go further away, it sets at an angle, all right? So in areas that are near to the poles, the sun's rays pass through the atmosphere at a very oblique angle, losing much of its energy. As a result, these areas are cold all year round. So that's what we call the frigid zone. Remember in the previous diagram, previous presentation, I showed you that diagram. All right. The temperate latitudes um, falls between the Tropic of Cancer and the Arctic Circle, or the Tropic of Capricorn and the Arctic Circle, and have moderate average annual temperature. So this is where you see the seasonal variation: summer, winter, autumn, spring, right? And these areas are warm in the summer months, right? And they are cold in the winter times. That's one factor that affects climate. Another factor that affects climate is topography or relief. That's the makeup of the land. The mountains, the rivers, the valleys, the plains, all of those things. The place is built up, all of that forms part of the topography, and that impacts climate. So the topography or the physical features of the Earth's surface influence weather and climate in specific regions. So, for example, mountains can affect the wind pattern and precipitation. So, as air is forced to rise over the mountain range, it cools and condenses. Remember, I said in the previous video that the higher up you go, the cooler it gets. The cooler it gets is the more the precipitation, is the more you're likely to get rainfall. So, the cooler it's likely to be. All right. And this leads to the formation of clouds, and from the clouds we get rainfall. This phenomenon is known as orographic lifting. Don't worry yourself, you're not going to get anything about orographic lifting, right? So as a result, the windward side of a mountain generally receives more precipitation, and that is because it faces the ocean. So it picks up the wind from the ocean, and as the warm air from the ocean, or in our case, the Caribbean Sea, hits the windward side, that's the west side of the mountain, it rises, and as it rises, it condenses, it cools and condenses, forms clouds, and by the time it reaches the top, it becomes very heavy, and so it has to release the rain. That's why that side of the island, of the mountain, gets more rainfall. So areas in Portland and St. Andrew and St. Thomas, in the Blue Mountain areas, tend to get a lot of rainfall. And then by the time the cloud reaches the mountain and comes over, it is very light. Still has some precipitation in there. So Kingston and the other part of St. Andrew and St. Catharines, they get some rainfall, but not as much as Portland and St. Thomas and St. Andrew. All right. So topography plays an integral role in that. Another factor that influences climate and weather is distance from the sea. Oceans and seas influence the climate of areas near the coast. So Seas warm up and cool more slowly than land, and because of this, they help to moderate the temperature of areas near the sea. What does that mean? It means that they have a cooling effect when an area is warm and a warming effect when an area is cold. So the sea regulates the temperature. All right. Therefore, areas near the sea usually have a smaller annual range of temperature than areas at the same location that are further away from the sea. For instance, in temperate latitudes, areas near the sea tend to have warmer winters and cooler summers than areas far from the sea. Another factor is land and sea breeze that blows in from off the sea. All right, so they occur because the land and the sea heats up and cools down at different times. So sea breeze occurs during the day. During the day, the land heats up faster than the sea. Air over the land heats up and rises, creating an area of lower pressure over the land. Cooler, denser air from over the sea flows to the land to replace the air that has been the warm air that rises. Now, at night, the land cools faster than the sea. So air over the land cools and sinks, so it comes down, creating higher pressure than the land. This cooler, dense air flows from the land to the sea, and this is called sea breeze. Another factor is prevailing winds, and the prevailing winds is a surface wind that blows predominantly from one direction. The prevailing wind in an area can impact weather and climate. So, for in the Caribbean, the prevailing wind is the northeast trade wind. It blows in from the Atlantic. It is the northeast trade wind that carries in, for example, the prevailing trade wind that gives us the hurricanes that impact us each year. It brings in moisture, cause relief rain, and also as it rises over the mountain. When some places are influenced more than others by the prevailing wind. So in some parts of West Africa, for example, like Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, which used to be called Ivory Coast, and Senegal. The northeast trade wind blows from off the Sahara Desert between November and middle March. This prevailing wind is dry and prevents rainfall. So between June and November, hey, what do you remember about June and November as it relates to our condition? That's correct. Between June and November is when we have our hurricane season. So between June and November, the southeast trade wind becomes the prevailing wind in these areas, and it blows in from the Atlantic, bringing moisture and causing cloud formation and rainfall, and leads to the creation of hurricanes or tropical storms during the period of June and November. All right. What does all of this mean? All of this means that these prevailing weather condition has an impact on our climate. And so what we are going to do now in our next video is that we're going to look at how weather conditions are affect our climate. What are the factors that cause climate change, and how climate change that's what I should say, how climate change impact our weather and climatic conditions, and the repercussions that it have on us. I trust that this short presentation was able to assist you in some way in your preparation. Please remember, this presentation goes along with your notes that you should have written in your notebook, so you can go over your notes and ensure that you do well at your studies. And remember, do not fail my test. Have a great day, everyone.